Hi, I'm Ingrid Srinath, and I'm Director of the Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy at Ashoka University near New Delhi in India. It's been a while since I was last at a Council on Foundations conference, but I do hope you're all having as stimulating a time there as I remember having. I want to talk to you today about the situation in India post-COVID, how that's impacted civil society and philanthropy, and try and get a little glimpse into what the future might hold. Most of you will have seen the grim images in the news from India. First, last year's harrowing stories of migrant workers walking thousands of miles after they were reduced to penury by this precipitous lockdown that was announced with less than 4 hours' notice. This, of course, in a country that has little or no social protection. Many hundreds of them perished from hunger and exhaustion even before they could make it back to their families that depend on them for their survival. Then more recently, you may have witnessed the horrific scenes in cities across India as people have scrambled for oxygen, for hospital beds, for medicines, even space in graveyards and crematoria. In each case, India's citizens have had to depend on each other, on philanthropy and on nonprofits, to step up to these enormous challenges as our government virtually abdicated its responsibilities. India's nonprofits, like their counterparts in any other part of the world, were confronted by a barrage of simultaneous challenges. On the one hand, surging needs from the communities that they serve, as poverty, unemployment, hunger, child marriage, child labor, violence against women, all spiked, especially among those on the margins of our society, the lower castes, LGBT communities, people with disabilities, and others whose stories never make the headlines. As in other countries, nonprofits here too have had to meet those needs while simultaneously struggling to keep their own staff and families safe and transitioning to online modes of operating. While they're doing this, they're still trying to figure out how to keep the lights on as funders move their support en masse to COVID relief and away from ongoing programs and core institutional support. Nonprofits who depend on funding from businesses under India's CSR law that requires businesses to invest 2% of net profits in social impact were particularly hard hit, we found in a survey that CSIP conducted in July last year. Different from their counterparts in other countries, however, was the situation India's nonprofits found themselves in when it came to being completely excluded from any relief programs that might help them save jobs or ensure their survival through the pandemic and beyond. They also uniquely found themselves competing with our Prime Minister himself as he launched his own PM Cares Fund that rapidly swept up about half, we estimate, of all philanthropic resources. Over and above all this, international support was abruptly choked off by new draconian amendments to our infamous FCRA, the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, that impose new constraints on receiving funding from abroad. Amendments, I should add, that were just rammed through Parliament in 2 days, with no prior notice and with very little debate. Despite months since then of intense lobbying and advocacy, including by some here in the US, there has been very little respite. As in so many other countries, it's really been the actions of those that we call ordinary citizens like you and me who have saved lives and livelihoods. Citizen groups, individuals, nonprofits have all mobilized through social media to provide food, transport, cash transfers, oxygen concentrators, as well as help with hospital admissions, access to vaccines, and advocacy for those being systematically excluded. These groups have been supported by an incredible outpouring of generosity from individuals. Online giving platforms in India are reporting growth between 180 and 500% in donations. The response from the Indian diaspora especially in North America, has been absolutely incredible. They have mobilized as individuals, as families, as employees, as entrepreneurs, and as nonprofits to provide support in cash, in kind, and in advocacy at all levels of business and government. A special shout out to the enterprising soul who last week tried to send 2 kilograms of cannabis as part of his relief supplies. We don't yet have hard data on corporate philanthropy and giving by high net worth individuals, but these two are all likely to see substantial increases in their grant making. We'll know what that amounts to later this year. Most of this money has, of course, gone towards immediate relief, food, equipment, livelihood support, substituting for the huge gaps in public infrastructure and services. In our second survey of nonprofits that we did in February this year, before this disastrous second wave, 64% of nonprofits reported negative impact on programs. Fewer than a fourth had funding to cover the next 12 months or more. Over half have had to reduce budgets, and a fifth have downsized staffing. As you would expect, smaller, more rural nonprofits, those with limited digital capacities, and those led by the underprivileged, religious minorities, lower castes, tribal communities, women, for instance, have been worst hit. In our exhaustive conversations with nonprofit leaders over the past months, we believe that organizations that have coped best with the crisis, even in some cases expanding their operations and growing their funding, all share 3 key characteristics. One, they have deep roots in the communities they serve, allowing them to rapidly assess needs as they emerge and change. Second, they have decentralized decision-making structures, permitting very high levels of autonomy at the front lines. And finally, they have great capacity to turn the evidence and stories that they are hearing from the grassroots into compelling communication to all their stakeholders. The nonprofit sector in India is going to need all those skills and more as it now races to stem the spread of the virus in rural India's 600,000 plus villages. And even when that's done, the battle will have only just begun, because we will then need to double down to address the massive reversals in progress that the pandemic has caused. Some estimates suggest that India has lost a decade of progress on the SDGs. Inequality is soaring. A new study from the Azim Premji University reports that over 230 million Indians have been pushed back below the poverty line during the pandemic. On the other hand, according to the Hurun list, India added 55 new dollar billionaires during 2020. And beyond issues of socio-economic development, India's democracy is fraying at the seams. Activists, journalists, students, even cartoonists have been jailed, accused of offenses like sedition and waging war against the state. They're often held in inhuman conditions, especially in these pandemic times, without being brought to trial for years at a stretch. Muslims and members of other marginalized groups are being lynched in broad daylight with complete impunity. Our basic freedoms of expression, association, and assembly come under greater threat each week. India deprives its citizens of access to the internet more than any other country on our planet. The new laws for social media threaten freedom of expression, even as more instruments of surveillance are being deployed against citizens. Institutions that are critical to the health of our democracy, our judiciary, law enforcement and investigating agencies, human rights bodies, the Election Commission, and many others are being systematically eroded. And space for civil society, despite its stellar contribution during the pandemic, is shrinking rapidly. Business, philanthropy, and much of the mainstream media have sadly been effectively silenced or co-opted. Are there any silver linings amidst this gloom? I see at least 6. 1, we, philanthropy and civil society, in India, in the US, and around the world, have had many of our assumptions challenged about our reach, our capacity for scale, our modes of program design and delivery, who our target clients are and what we can offer them. And we have responded with creativity, innovation, and courage. 2, funders everywhere have learned that they can significantly reduce the red tape and bureaucracy involved in grant making without much increased risk, and that they can actually trust their nonprofit partners to know what the best solutions for their communities are, especially when those organizations are led by people within those communities. 3, we have rediscovered the value of our ecosystems, those entities like the Council on Foundations that provide the knowledge, networks, norms, and narratives that allow us to function most effectively. 4, we have clearly understood the limitations of untrammeled markets and the criticality of strong public infrastructure and services. 5, we have learned that we are each only as safe as the most vulnerable in our world, and that it's only through partnership and collaboration that we can multiply our capacity to solve the humongous problems that lie ahead of us. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, we've learned that, like Winnie the Pooh, we are braver than we believe, stronger than we seem, and smarter than we think. Thank you. Have a great conference.